Hello, I'm James Green, partner at Actual Tech Media, and I have the pleasure of being joined today by David Davis, also partner at Actual Tech Media, and together we have recently authored a new book entitled The Guerrilla Guide to Hyperconvergence for the SMB. And so today we're going to talk just briefly about some of the topics we cover in the book and the things you can learn if you're interested in reading it. So the first thing we talk about in the book is the concept of virtualization. And for a lot of people, especially if you work in the enterprise space, perhaps virtualization seems like a technology that's already kind of come and gone as an interesting concept in the data center. But what we've found is that there are still a lot of first-time virtualizers out there who are just discovering the impact that virtualization can have on their data center. And so this book is written kind of to address that, and then how hyperconvergence, empowered by virtualization, can really help them operationally simplify their data center and cost optimize and all that. So David, I just want to ask you a couple of questions about the book and the things we wrote about in there. Could you tell me just briefly, what is virtualization for somebody who has not heard of it before? Can you explain the concept of virtualization?
Yeah, absolutely, James. Like you said, so many enterprises, they've already virtualized, many years ago. But to many companies, especially small and medium-sized businesses, it's brand new. They've heard about it, but they don't fully understand the concept. Essentially, what it is it's an abstraction layer. And what that means really is that the operating systems that right now are running on your physical servers, they're moved up a layer and they're put inside of a container, if you want to call it that, basically a wrapper where this operating system runs, and that's called a virtual machine. And that virtual machine is unaware, it's abstracted away from the hardware that it's running on, which is the physical server. So you're able to run not just one operating system and one application or one database on a physical server. You're able to run multiple virtual machines, each with their own operating system and application running inside, all on the same physical server.
Got it. So it sounds like in a lot of cases you might be able to do more with less by consolidating that way.
Absolutely, yeah. I think so many small and medium-sized businesses, they might not have virtualized simply because maybe they just had 2, 3, 4, applications. So it seemed easier just to have 2, 3, or 4, physical servers. But as the number of physical servers grows, they become more difficult to manage. As the number of applications grow, things get tougher, to manage. You spend more time, so they might be able to, the next time they need to refresh their hardware because it's getting old, maybe they could just run with one server or 2 servers for high availability, still run all the same applications, and gain a lot of efficiency in management. Can manage them all from a single interface. A lot of simplification around things like data protection, smaller footprint, less heat, less cooling, lower electric bill, just maybe 2 servers, for example, to manage in a SMB, and gain some features that they weren't used to having before. Perhaps server high availability. So if one fails, the other one will take over.
Sure. So we both mentioned that virtualization has been around for a while and especially popular in the enterprise, but I hear you saying a lot of things that make virtualization useful even to the SMB customer. Other than some very specific edge cases, is there really a size of customer who shouldn't virtualize?
I would say I'd try to virtualize even if I just had one physical server, just to give me greater efficiency, to help me prepare for the future, and to gain, a lot of management, efficiency out of it. So I don't think there's a particular size. I would recommend, all small and medium-sized businesses, learn enough about virtualization to at least get started. And especially because today it's easier, it's less expensive, there's more resources. And so if maybe you looked at it in the past and you thought, well, that's just for the big enterprises, I encourage you to look at the innovative, lower cost, solutions that are available in virtualization today.
Excellent. So let's move on to the next thing. Another thing, and kind of the main focus of the book, was this concept of hyperconvergence. That's something that for the last 2, maybe 3 years, people have started to hear about and want to know more about. It reminds me a lot of the early days of virtualization, where there's a lot of enterprise customers out there who tried it out early on, started testing with it, and in a lot of cases, they're running it in production at this point very successfully. First of all, tell me, what is hyperconvergence as a data center architecture?
Sure, yeah, hyperconvergence is basically using software-defined storage. So moving from, say, a traditional hardware-based storage array, which you might know as a SAN or a NAS, moving that into software that's distributed across your servers, whether you have 2, 3, 4, or many more. And so you're storing all your data in this distributed software layer, and then you're managing it from a single interface, both the virtualization layer as well as the software-defined storage. You're able to manage that from a single interface. And many companies offer it packaged with hardware. So you can buy a single hardware appliance that has maybe 3 servers in it, or you buy 3 appliances and they're all connected together. And then you have a single call for support for the virtualization layer, for the software-defined storage, and for the hardware as well.
Awesome. So that sounds interesting. One thing that we talk about in the book that I would love to have you talk briefly about is, why would you do that? What advantages come from leveraging hyperconvergence?
Well, if you compare it to a traditional virtual infrastructure, where if you want to achieve storage high availability and use advanced features like VMware's distributed resource scheduler or VMware's high availability, for example, those features that people kind of hope they can get out of their virtual infrastructure. If you want to use features like that, you have to put in a shared storage array of some kind, whether it's a NAS or a SAN, and it doesn't make a difference, but you have to store all your virtual machines in one place. And because of that, so many SMBs haven't done it because it adds complexity. It's extremely expensive. There's a knowledge level that they have to get over right there, a learning curve that they have to get through. And so for that reason, they don't do it. What hyperconvergence does is it eliminates the need for that dedicated SAN or NAS. You can store your virtual machines in this distributed storage layer across the same number of servers, so the compute that you already have.
Sure. Sounds very helpful. One last question. I've mentioned a couple of times that in the case of virtualization, enterprises adopted it, SMBs kind of came later or are even just starting. Relative to hyperconvergence, should that be the same in that in a few years down the road, hyperconvergence might make sense for some of the smaller businesses, or do you feel that hyperconvergence is in a place right now where even small companies that maybe need 2, 3 servers to run their entire infrastructure, does hyperconvergence make sense for them?
Yeah, it absolutely does. So in many cases, they could replace, say, their 3 servers with 3 new servers that have hyperconvergence software and a virtualization hypervisor, and gain a ton of advanced features like we talked about, efficiency in management, high availability for the storage, and maybe even some advanced features like they didn't expect, like replication. And greater data efficiency management, of their data, and do it in many cases for the same price, that they were already paying for the 3 servers that they had, or the 3 servers they were about to purchase to replace their aging infrastructure, without ever having to purchase that SAN or NAS that they had hoped they could have one day, but was extremely complex and extremely costly.
Sure. So in that example, it sounds like they could kind of leave the physical and utility footprint the same or very similar, but substantially upgrade the functionality in that environment.
Absolutely, and that's because the servers today, they've gotten so powerful in terms of the amount of memory and CPU and storage I/O performance that they can offer, and then the software itself has gotten so intelligent. So by combining these fast servers faster than they ever were before with smarter software, you can do so much more with the same footprint essentially that you had, and in many cases with the same cost, that you spent, 5 years ago or whenever it was you last purchased a few servers in your SMB, data center or storage server closet, server room.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thank you, David. I appreciate it so much. If you're interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, that's exactly why we wrote the book. Again, the title of it is The Guerrilla Guide to Hyperconvergence for the SMB. If you want to learn more, go ahead and go download a free copy of that ebook and get up to speed on virtualization, hyperconvergence, and how you can really optimize your data center, a lot of times at a very similar cost to what you were going to do anyway. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thanks, James.